The pale horizon was dying. Commander Tylik stood on the bridge of his warship and stared at the damage reports scrolling across the main screen. Half the systems were offline. The left engine was gone, ripped away 3 days ago by a Drakari torpedo that had punched clean through the outer hull. The medical bay was overflowing with wounded crew members, and the ship's doctor had run out of proper supplies 2 weeks ago. He was now using whatever he could find to keep people alive. Tylik was tall, even by Varani standards. His species looked something like earth insects, long limbs, a hard shell-like skin that shifted between dark green and gray, and large black eyes that could see in near total darkness. But right now, those eyes looked tired. He had not slept in 4 days. Behind the pale horizon, 11 other Varani warships drifted in loose formation. 2 of them had lost the ability to steer, and were being towed by the others, dragged along like broken animals. The fleet had started with 19 ships. 7 were gone now, destroyed in the last battle at the Myrith Nebula. Tylik tried not to think about the crews that had been on those ships. He had known some of them for decades. The war with the Drakari Empire had been going on for almost 40 years. The Varani Compact, an alliance of 12 different species, had been losing slowly the entire time. The Drakari were brutal and efficient. They did not negotiate. They did not take prisoners unless they needed slaves. They moved from system to system, consuming everything: resources, technology, populations. Tylik had watched 3 civilizations disappear in his lifetime, simply erased from the galaxy as if they had never existed. And now his fleet, one of the last major fighting forces the Compact had left, was falling apart in the middle of nowhere. His navigation officer, a small gray-skinned Varani named Selik, turned from her console. "Commander, long-range scans have found a star system approximately 2 cycles away at our current speed. There is a habitable planet, 3rd from the star." Tylik leaned forward. "Is it in our records?" "No, Commander. It appears to be unregistered, pre-contact civilization. Primitive radio signals detected. No galactic communication signatures." Tylik closed his eyes. Pre-contact worlds were protected under Compact law. You were not supposed to approach them, talk to them, or interfere with their development in any way. The rules existed for good reason. Young civilizations could be damaged by contact with the wider galaxy before they were ready. But Compact law also assumed you had a fleet that could fly, and crew members who were not bleeding to death on the floor. "Set a course," Tylik said quietly. Selik hesitated for just a moment, then nodded and turned back to her console. It took them almost 3 days to reach the system. Tylik spent that time walking the corridors of his ship, visiting the wounded, checking on repairs that could not be completed without proper materials. The mood on the ship was grim. His people were soldiers, and they were used to hardship, but there was a limit to what anyone could take. He could see it in their eyes, not fear exactly, but something close to it, the look of people who were starting to believe they might not make it. When they finally entered the system, Tylik ordered the fleet to slow down and hold position near the outer planets. He studied the blue-green world on his screen. It was beautiful, in a simple way. Oceans, clouds, green land masses. The radio signals coming from it were chaotic and constant. Music, voices, data transmissions, all of it jumbled together in a noisy mess. These beings talked a lot, whoever they were. He ordered a message broadcast. His communications officer sent it out in every known galactic language, all 47 of them, along with mathematical patterns that any intelligent species should be able to recognize. Then they waited. On Earth, it was a Tuesday evening in New Mexico when the signals arrived. Lieutenant Katie Marsh was on the night shift at a deep space monitoring facility run jointly by the Air Force and NASA. She was 29 years old, had short brown hair, and had been working at the facility for 3 years with without anything interesting ever happening. Most nights, she drank bad coffee and watched data streams that showed absolutely nothing. Tonight was different. The signal came in strong and clear, and it was obviously not natural. Katie sat up straight in her chair, set down her coffee, and ran the data through 3 different filters. Her hands were shaking slightly. The signal contained structured patterns, mathematical sequences, repeated in a way that could not be random. And behind those patterns, audio in dozens of languages she had never heard before. She picked up the phone and called her supervisor. Then her supervisor called his supervisor. Within 2 hours, the information had reached the Pentagon. General Sam Hubbard was pulled out of a dinner with his wife to take a secure call. He was 56 years old, built like a man who had spent his life in the military, with a square jaw and gray hair cut short. He listened to the briefing without interrupting, asked 3 sharp questions, and then said, "Wake everyone up. I want a full crisis team assembled by morning." By the time the sun rose, a joint task force had been formed. Military, intelligence, NASA, civilian scientists, all pulled together under a security classification so high that most of the people involved were not allowed to tell their families where they were going. Katie Marsh found herself on a helicopter to Washington, clutching a laptop full of signal data and wondering if she was dreaming. It took the combined effort of linguists, mathematicians, and computer scientists nearly 16 hours to crack enough of the alien message to understand its meaning. When they finally did, the room went very quiet. Katie read the translation out loud to the assembled group. "We are the remnants of a fleet of the Varani Compact. We have been defeated in battle. Our ships are damaged. Our crew are wounded. We carry no hostile intent. We ask only for shelter and repair. Please, we are dying." General Hubbard stared at the screen for a long time. Then he looked around the room at the stunned faces of the smartest people he had ever been in a room with. "Well," he said, "I guess we better go say hello." Above the earth, Tylek waited. He did not know if the beings on the blue planet below would answer, or if they would even understand. He did not know if they would be afraid, or hostile, or simply too primitive to help. He did not know that he had just made the most important decision of the entire war. The first face-to-face meeting between humans and the Varani happened 48 hours after the signal was received. A specially modified NASA shuttle, normally used for servicing satellites, was launched from Cape Canaveral with a crew of 6. Among them were Danny Klein, a 34-year-old NASA engineer who had spent the last decade working on spacecraft propulsion systems, and Megan Pratt, a 31-year-old Air Force linguist who spoke 5 human languages and was now being asked to learn her 6th, an alien one. Danny was a calm, quiet man with brown eyes and a habit of chewing on the end of his pen when he was thinking. He had wanted to work in space since he was a boy building model rockets in his backyard in Ohio. He had imagined many versions of what that career might look like. None of them had involved docking with a damaged alien warship while the entire world held its breath. Megan was the opposite, sharp, fast-talking, and slightly terrified. She had been trained to work with foreign languages and cultures, but her training had always assumed the foreigners would at least be human. She sat in the shuttle, reviewing the fragments of Varani language they had decoded so far, muttering to herself and making notes in a small notebook she carried everywhere. When the shuttle docked with the pale horizon, the airlock opened, and the human delegation stepped into the alien ship for the first time. The corridor was dimly lit, and the air smelled strange, dry, and slightly metallic, like old copper. The walls were smooth and curved, made of a dark material that seemed to absorb light. Everything was built for beings taller and thinner than humans, and Danny found himself ducking under doorframes as they were led deeper into the ship. What struck them first was not the alien technology. It was the damage. The ship was gutted. Entire sections of wall had been torn away, exposing wiring and pipes that sparked and leaked. Scorch marks covered the floors and ceilings. They passed through a corridor where the outer hull had been breached and temporarily patched with what looked like sheets of metal welded roughly into place. Through gaps in the patch, Danny could see the blackness of space. And everywhere, there were wounded. Varani crew members sat or lay along the walls, wrapped in bandages that were stained dark green. Their blood, Danny realized. Some of them looked up as the humans passed. Their large black eyes followed the strange small beings with something that might have been curiosity, or hope, or simply exhaustion. Commander Tylek met them on the bridge. He was taller than any of them had expected, nearly 7 feet, and he moved with a careful, deliberate grace that reminded Danny of a praying mantis. Through a crude translation device that Megan had helped build using the decoded language fragments, Tylek welcomed them aboard and apologized for the state of his ship. "There is no need to apologize," Megan said carefully, speaking slowly so the translator could keep up. "We are here to help." Tylek's dark eyes studied her for a long moment. Then he began to explain. He told them about the Drakari Empire, how it had been expanding across the galaxy for over a century, consuming world after world. He told them about the Varani Compact, the alliance that had tried to stop them, and how it was failing. He told them about the battles, the losses, the civilizations that had been wiped out. He spoke calmly and clearly, like a soldier giving a report, but Danny could hear the weight behind every word. This was not just a war story. This was a confession from a man who believed his side was losing. When Tylek finished, the room was silent. Danny looked at Megan. Megan looked at Danny. Then Danny did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He asked to see the engine room. Tylek led him down 3 levels to the main engineering section. It was a mess. The primary drive system was a type of engine Danny had never seen before. It bent space in a way that allowed faster-than-light travel, using principles that human physics had only theorized about. But the engine itself was in terrible shape. Components were cracked, power lines were severed, and half the control systems were dead. Danny spent 2 hours in that engine room, crawling under consoles, examining materials, and asking questions through the translator that grew increasingly technical. The Varani engineers watched him with a mixture of confusion and fascination. This small, soft creature with no shell and no claws was poking around their most advanced technology like a mechanic looking under the hood of a car. When Danny finally came back up to the bridge, he asked to make a call to Earth. General Hubbard was waiting on a secure line. "General," Danny said, "their technology is advanced, maybe 200 years ahead of us in some areas, but their manufacturing is terrible. They build everything by hand, one piece at a time, like craftsmen. They don't have anything like our industrial base. Their ships are works of art, but they can't replace parts quickly." "What are you telling me, Klein?" Hubbard asked. "I'm telling you that we can fix these ships, not just patch them up, actually fix them, and if you give me the resources, I think we can make them better than they were before." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Danny could almost hear the general thinking. "What do you need?" Hubbard asked. Danny told him. He needed steel, aluminum, titanium. He needed welders, machinists, electricians, and computer programmers. He needed access to the best shipyards in the country, and he needed all of it immediately. Hubbard made it happen. Within a week, an emergency resolution had been pushed through the United Nations Security Council. Quietly, behind closed doors, with details classified at the highest level. Shipyards in Newport News, Virginia, were cleared and retooled. Factories in Detroit and Pittsburgh began producing custom parts based on specifications that Danny sent down from orbit. Military cargo shuttles began making daily runs between Earth and the Varani fleet, carrying tons of materials and hundreds of workers. Corey Watts was one of those workers. He was 42 years old, a civilian shipbuilder who had spent 20 years building aircraft carriers and submarines. He was big, loud, and had hands like shovels. When he first stepped onto the pale horizon and saw the damage, he let out a long whistle and said, "Boys, we got our work cut out for us." He became the foreman of the repair operation, managing mixed teams of humans and Varani who could barely communicate with each other. They used hand signals, drawings, and a lot of patience. The Varani were amazed at how fast the humans worked. They were used to repairs taking months. The humans worked in shifts around the clock and started producing results in days. Tylek watched all of this from the bridge of his ship. He had come to Earth expecting nothing. Perhaps some raw metal, if these primitive beings could provide it. Perhaps a quiet place to let his wounded die in peace. Instead, he had found a species that looked at broken alien warships and said, "We can fix that." He did not know yet just how much the humans were about to change everything. 3 months after the Varani fleet arrived in Earth's orbit, Commander Tylek called a meeting with his senior officers. He stood before them in the newly repaired command room of the Pale Horizon, a room that now had working lights, clean air filters, and a display screen that no longer flickered, and he said something none of them expected. "I believe we may have underestimated these beings." It was perhaps the greatest understatement in Varani history. The humans had not just repaired the fleet, they had rebuilt it. Every ship in the formation had been stripped down, patched, welded, rewired, and reassembled with a combination of Varani technology and human engineering that nobody had planned for, but which worked far better than anyone had imagined. Human steel, it turned out, was remarkably strong. Varani metallurgy was advanced but specialized. They built with exotic alloys that were light and heat-resistant, but expensive and slow to produce. Human steel and titanium were simple by comparison, but they were tough, plentiful, and could be manufactured in enormous quantities almost overnight. Corey Watts and his teams had replaced entire hull sections on 6 of the 12 ships using human-made armor plating. The Varani engineers had been skeptical at first. Their materials were superior on paper. But Corey showed them something they had never considered: layered armor. Instead of one thick plate, the humans welded multiple thinner plates with small gaps between them, designed to absorb and distribute the energy of an impact. It was a technique that humans had developed over centuries of building tanks and warships to survive enemy fire. The Varani had never fought a ground war in their history. They had never needed to think about armor the way humans did. When they tested the new plating against simulated Drakari weapons fire, the results were remarkable. The layered human armor held up almost as well as the original Varani materials, at a fraction of the cost and production time. Corey grinned and slapped a Varani engineer on the back, hard enough to make the alien stumble. "That's American steel, friend," he said. The Varani did not understand the words, but he understood the pride behind them. But the armor was only the beginning. Nina Voss arrived on the Pale Horizon during the 6th week of repairs. She was 26 years old, a software engineer from San Jose who had been working at a defense contractor when she was pulled into the project. She was small, wore glasses, and spoke so fast that even other humans sometimes had trouble keeping up with her. She had been brought in to look at the Varani targeting systems. What she found horrified her. The Varani targeting software was old, not just outdated, ancient. It had been written decades ago and patched so many times that the underlying code was a mess of contradictions and workarounds. The system was slow, clumsy, and required a trained gunner to make constant manual adjustments during combat. Against the Drakari, who used fast-moving attack ships that changed direction constantly, the Varani gunners missed more often than they hit. Nina spent 3 days studying the code, then went to Danny Klein and told him she could fix it. "How?" Danny asked. The same way we track targets in video games, she said. Predictive algorithms. You don't aim where the target is, you aim where it's going to be. Human game developers have been solving this problem for 40 years. Their gunners are doing everything manually. We can automate 90% of it. Danny gave her a team of 5 programmers and access to the Varani weapon systems. Nina and her team worked for 2 weeks straight, sleeping in shifts on cots set up in the corner of the weapons bay. They rewrote the entire targeting system from the ground up, using principles borrowed from first-person shooter games, missile guidance systems, and air traffic control software. When they were done, they ran a live test. The Varani gunnery chief, an old soldier named Harath, who had been fighting the Drakari for 20 years, fired at a series of fast-moving drone targets that simulated enemy attack ships. He hit every single one. When the test was over, he sat in his chair for a long time, without speaking. Then he looked at Nina, and although his alien face could not make human expressions, something in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. He had spent his entire career missing shots that mattered, and now he would not miss again. While Nina worked on targeting, Danny Klein was working on something bigger. He had been studying Varani weapons for weeks, and he had noticed a critical problem. The Varani used energy-based weapons, beams of focused plasma that were powerful but required enormous amounts of power to fire. Against the Drakari, whose ships used energy-absorbing shields, these weapons were increasingly ineffective. Each shot drained the ship's power reserves, and the Drakari shield simply soaked up the energy and redistributed it. Danny proposed a solution that made the Varani engineers stare at him as if he had lost his mind. Kinetic weapons, he said. We throw things at them. The concept was almost laughably simple by galactic standards. Instead of energy beams, Danny's team designed electromagnetic railguns, devices that used powerful magnets to accelerate solid metal slugs to incredible speeds. The physics were straightforward. A chunk of tungsten moving at a significant fraction of the speed of light carried an enormous amount of kinetic energy. And, unlike plasma beams, that energy could not be absorbed by shields designed to handle electromagnetic radiation. The slug would simply punch through. It took a month to build the first prototype. They tested it by firing at a chunk of captured Drakari shield plating that the Varani had brought with them. The railgun slug went through it like a bullet through paper. Danny watched the test from behind a safety barrier, and when the dust cleared and the hole in the shield plate was clearly visible, he allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Meanwhile, Megan Pratt had been doing work of a different kind. She had spent the past 3 months studying everything the Varani knew about the Drakari, their tactics, their fleet movements, their communication patterns, their command structure. She was not an engineer. She could not build weapons or rewrite code. But she could read patterns in behavior the same way she read patterns in language, and what she found was valuable. The Drakari operated on a rigid hierarchy. Every battle group was controlled by a single command ship, and every command ship answered to a regional commander. Orders flowed from the top down and were followed without question. It made the Drakari efficient, but it also made them fragile. If you removed the command ship from a battle group, the remaining ships did not adapt. They followed their last orders until those orders no longer made sense, and then they simply stopped fighting effectively. They did not retreat in an organized way. They scattered. Megan presented her findings to General Hubbard in a video briefing. Their whole system depends on central command, she said. It's their greatest strength and their greatest weakness. If we can take out the head, the body dies. Hubbard nodded slowly. He was already thinking about how to use this. He had spent his career studying military strategy, and everything Megan described reminded him of armies throughout human history that had suffered the same fatal flaw. Cut off the leadership, and discipline collapses. On the bridge of the pale horizon, Commander Tylek stood with Danny Klein and looked out at the fleet. The ships looked different now. stronger. The human modifications were visible: patches of darker metal, new weapon mounts along the hulls, antenna arrays that had not been there before. They were no longer purely Varani ships. They were something new, something hybrid. Tylek spoke quietly, almost to himself, but Danny heard him through the translator. "When we came here, I thought your species was young and small. I thought you might give us metal and food, and we would thank you and leave. I did not expect this." He paused. "Your species has spent its entire existence fighting itself. Every war, every weapon, every strategy, all of it developed against your own kind. You have become experts in destruction in a way that no species in the Compact has ever needed to be. And now you are pointing all of that knowledge outward." He turned to look at Danny. "The Drakari have no idea what is coming." Danny Klein, who was not a soldier, and had never considered himself a dangerous man, felt a chill run down his spine. Not from fear, from something else entirely. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a quiet voice said, "Good." 6 months after the Varani fleet limped into Earth's orbit, the combined fleet launched. It was the first time in human history that people left their own solar system, and it happened not with celebration or ceremony, but with the quiet, grim focus of soldiers heading to war. The fleet consisted of 12 Varani warships, fully repaired and armed with human weapons, and 3 small escort vessels that had been built from scratch in Earth's shipyards over the past 2 months. They were ugly ships, boxy, armored, and graceless compared to the smooth curves of Varani design. But they were tough, fast, and packed with railguns. The humans had built them the way they built everything: practical, effective, and meant to take a beating. Captain Luke Harmon commanded the lead human ship, the DSV Longshot. He was 38 years old, a Navy officer who had spent most of his career on submarines. He was not tall, not loud, and not the kind of man who gave inspiring speeches. He was the kind of man who stayed calm when things went wrong, and things were about to go very wrong. His first officer was Lieutenant Amy Soto, a 33-year-old from Texas, who had transferred from the Air Force to join the program. She was sharp, organized, and had a dry sense of humor that kept the crew grounded during the long, tense journey through hyperspace. The crew of the Longshot was entirely volunteer. Every single person on board had been told exactly how dangerous this mission was, and had chosen to go anyway. The target was the Kasari Corridor, a narrow passage through a region of dense nebula clouds that the Drakari used as a supply route for their forward fleets. Megan Pratt's intelligence work had identified a window. A Drakari command carrier, escorted by a battle group of roughly 40 warships, would be passing through the corridor in 3 days. If they could destroy that carrier and scatter the battle group, it would cut off supplies to an entire sector of the Drakari front line. The plan was built around everything the humans had learned: Megan's analysis of Drakari command structure, Nina's targeting systems, Danny's railguns, and a level of tactical aggression that made the Varani officers deeply uncomfortable. Commander Tylek reviewed the battle plan with Luke Harmon the night before the engagement. The plan called for the Varani ships to engage the main Drakari fleet in a broad formation, drawing their attention and spreading their forces thin. Meanwhile, the 3 human ships led by the Longshot would use the nebula clouds as cover to swing around and hit the command carrier from behind. "This is extremely risky," Tylek said, studying the tactical display. "The command carrier will be heavily defended. Your ships are small and few. If the Drakari detect you before you reach firing range, you will be destroyed." Harmon nodded. "That's correct." Tylek waited for more. An explanation, perhaps. A reassurance. Harmon offered none. He simply looked at the display with the steady, focused expression of a man who had already accepted what might happen and had decided to do it anyway. 40 Drakari warships turned to face the Varani formation, and the space between the two fleets erupted in fire. The Drekhari fought the way they always fought, coordinated, disciplined, and ruthless. Their ships moved in tight formations, shields overlapping, pouring concentrated fire at the Varani line. But the Varani ships were not the same broken vessels they had been 6 months ago. Human armor held against hits that would have torn through the old hull plating. Nina's targeting systems, like the Varani gunners, track and hit Drekhari ships with a precision they had never achieved before. And the railguns, mounted alongside the traditional plasma weapons, began to do their work. The first Drekhari ship to fall was a destroyer on the left flank. A railgun slug from the pale horizon struck it amidships, punching clean through its energy shield and tearing a hole in the hull. The ship broke apart in a flash of white light. The Varani bridge crew stared at their screens. They had never killed a Drekhari ship that quickly before. But the Drekhari had numbers, and numbers mattered. For every ship the Varani destroyed, 3 more pressed the attack. The Varani line began to bend under the pressure. Ships took damage. 2 Varani frigates lost engine power and began to drift. The battle was turning into exactly the kind of grinding fight that the Drekhari always won. Meanwhile, the 3 human ships slipped through the nebula clouds on the far side of the corridor. The clouds were dense with charged particles that scrambled sensors and made navigation dangerous. Amy Soto sat at the tactical console of the Longshot, watching the sensor feed flicker and jump as the nebula played havoc with their instruments. She guided them through using a combination of the ship's sensors and her own instincts, calling out course corrections to the helm in a calm, steady voice. They emerged from the clouds less than 2,000 kilometers from the Drekhari command carrier. It was enormous, 3 times the size of any other ship on the field, bristling with weapons and surrounded by a screen of 6 escort destroyers. This was the brain of the Drekhari battle group. Kill it, and the rest would fall apart. All ships weapons free, Harmon said. The 3 human ships opened fire simultaneously. Railgun slugs streaked across the void and slammed into the escort destroyers. 2 of them were hit before they even knew the humans were there. Their shields, designed to absorb energy weapons, did almost nothing against solid tungsten moving at tremendous speed. 1 escort broke in half. The other spun away, engines dead, venting atmosphere. The remaining 4 escorts turned to engage. The next 60 seconds were the most violent and chaotic of Luke Harmon's life. The Longshot shook as Drekhari plasma fire raked across its hull. Alarms screamed. Crew members were thrown from their stations. One of the other human ships, the DSV Ironside, took a direct hit to its engine section and went dark, drifting out of the fight. But the human ships kept firing, railgun after railgun, pounding the escorts, clearing a path to the command carrier. "Soto, I need more power to the forward guns," Harmon said. Amy was already moving. She pulled up the power distribution console and began rerouting energy from non-essential systems. Life support went to minimum. Internal lighting dropped to emergency red. She pulled power from the rear shields, a dangerous choice, but the enemy was in front of them, not behind. "You've got it," she said. The Longshot surged forward, its railguns firing in a steady rhythm. The last 2 escort destroyers fell, one after the other, their hulls cracked open by kinetic fire. The command carrier was exposed. It was at this moment that the Drekhari commander finally understood what was happening. The carrier began to turn, bringing its main weapons to bear on the tiny human ship racing toward it. A blast of concentrated plasma caught the Longshot across its midsection. The ship screamed. Metal twisted. A section of the lower deck collapsed. 17 crew members died in an instant. Amy Soto was thrown from her chair. She hit the console hard, felt something break in her side. and pulled herself back up. Blood ran down her face from a cut above her eye. The power systems were failing. The plasma hit had severed the main conduit to the forward railguns. She left her station, ran down the corridor, to the junction room, and began rerouting the power manually, pulling cables and reconnecting lines with her bare hands while the ship shook around her. A secondary explosion tore through the wall behind her. She did not stop. "Forward guns back online," she said over the comm, her voice tight with pain. 30 seconds later, a power surge from the damaged conduit blew through the junction room. Amy Soto was killed instantly. On the bridge, Harmon heard the report. He closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he opened them and gave the order. "Fire everything." The Longshot's railguns fired in one final sustained volley. At the same time, the Pale Horizon, which had broken through the Drakari line at terrible cost, added its own fire from the opposite side. Human kinetic slugs and Varani plasma beams hit the command carrier from 2 directions simultaneously. Its hull buckled, and then it broke apart, splitting into 3 burning pieces that tumbled slowly through the darkness of the corridor. The effect was immediate. Across the battlefield, the Drakari fleet faltered. Ships that had been pressing the attack suddenly slowed. Formations broke apart. Individual captains, cut off from the command they depended on, began making contradictory decisions. Some tried to retreat, some kept fighting, some simply stopped, as if waiting for orders that would never come. The Varani fleet did not wait. They pressed forward with everything they had left, and the Drakari battle group shattered like glass. When it was over, 26 Drakari ships had been destroyed. The rest had fled into hyperspace. The Kasari corridor belonged to the Compact. Captain Luke Harmon sat in his command chair on the battered bridge of the Longshot. Half his crew was dead or wounded. His ship would never fly again under its own power. He was bleeding from a dozen small cuts, and his left arm hung at an angle that told him it was broken. But they had won. The first decisive victory against the Drakari in 30 years. And it had been won, in no small part, by a species that had not even known the galaxy existed 6 months ago. The news of the battle at the Kasari corridor traveled across the galaxy faster than any ship could fly. For the Varani Compact, it was like a light turning on in a dark room. For 40 years they had been losing. Every battle, every campaign, every desperate stand had ended the same way: retreat, loss, and the slow grinding away of hope. Their alliance of 12 species had been held together not by confidence, but by the simple fact that surrender meant extinction. They fought because there was nothing else to do. And then a species nobody had ever heard of, from a small blue planet in an unregistered system, walked into the war and broke the pattern. The Compact Council, the governing body of the Alliance, held an emergency session within days of the battle. Representatives from all 12 member species gathered via long-range communication relay to hear Commander Tylek's report. He stood before them, still wearing the same uniform he had worn during the battle, and told them everything. He told them about the humans, their industrial capacity, their engineering creativity, their weapons, their software, and their willingness to fight. He told them about Amy Soto, who had died reconnecting power lines with her bare hands so that her ship could keep firing. He told them about Luke Harmon, who had flown a ship he knew would not survive into the teeth of the most powerful vessel on the battlefield. When he finished, the council was silent for a long time. Then the representative of the Tohari, a species of quiet, thoughtful beings who rarely spoke in council sessions, sent something that would be repeated across the galaxy for years to come. The humans did not have to fight. They owed us nothing. They had never been attacked by the Drakari. They had never even heard of the Drakari until we arrived. Not because they were asked. Not because they were obligated, but because they decided it was the right thing to do. The Council voted unanimously to offer Earth full membership in the Varani Compact. Not as a junior partner, not as an associate, as a full member, with a seat at the table, and a voice in every decision. It was the fastest admission in the history of the Alliance. On the Drakari side, the reaction was very different. The loss at the Kasari corridor was not just a military defeat, it was a psychological one. The Drakari had built their empire on the belief that they were unstoppable. They moved forward, always forward, and nothing could stand in their way. The idea that a previously unknown species could appear out of nowhere and hand them their worst defeat in a generation was deeply unsettling. Their intelligence services scrambled to learn everything they could about Earth and its inhabitants. What they found did not comfort them. This species had split the atom and used it as a weapon against their own kind. They had fought 2 wars that spanned their entire planet within the same generation. They had developed biological weapons, chemical weapons, and digital weapons. They had invented the concept of mutually assured destruction, and then continued to build more weapons anyway, just in case. The Drakari High Command held a closed session. The details of that meeting were never made public, but the outcome was, for the first time in over a century of expansion, the Drakari Empire sent a message requesting a ceasefire. Back on Earth, the secret of first contact could not be kept any longer. Too many people had been involved. Too many factories had been retooled. Too many workers had been sent to orbit. Too many families had been told that their loved ones were on a classified assignment without further explanation. The truth came out in pieces at first. Leaked photographs, anonymous reports, shaky video from a shipyard worker's phone, showing a Varani technician working alongside human welders. The official announcement was made by the President of the United States, standing alongside the Secretary General of the United Nations, and a holographic projection of Commander Tylik. The broadcast was watched by an estimated 4 billion people. The reaction was everything all at once: fear, excitement, anger, wonder, confusion, pride. There were protests from people who felt they should have been told sooner. There were celebrations from people who felt that humanity had passed a test they did not know they were taking. Religious leaders debated what it meant. Scientists wept openly on live television. But beneath all the noise, there was a feeling that most people shared, even if they could not put it into words. The universe was bigger and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. And somehow, against all odds, the human race had risen to meet it. Danny Klein was offered and accepted the position of Earth's first ambassador to the Varani Compact. It was a strange choice. He was an engineer, not a diplomat. But General Hubbard argued that Danny understood the Varani better than anyone, and had earned their trust through months of working side by side. Danny accepted the role with the same quiet calm he brought to everything. He packed a small bag, said goodbye to his family in Ohio, and boarded a Varani transport ship. Megan Pratt stayed on Earth and established a joint human-Varani intelligence division. Her work analyzing the Drakari command structure had proven so valuable that the Compact Council specifically requested she lead the effort to develop ongoing intelligence operations. She built a team of analysts, linguists, and strategists drawn from 12 countries and 3 different species. Her small notebook, the one she had carried onto the pale horizon on the first day, sat on her desk as a reminder of how it all started. Nina Voss was offered a position at every major technology company on Earth. She turned them all down. Instead, she joined a new division within NASA that was dedicated to adapting human technology for galactic use. Her targeting systems had already been shared with the wider Compact fleet, and Varani gunners across the Alliance were now hitting targets they would have missed before. She was 26 years old, and had already changed the course of an interstellar war. She handled it by drinking too much coffee and refusing to give interviews. Corey Watts went home to Newport News. He walked back into the same shipyard where he had spent 20 years building carriers and submarines, and he began designing the next generation of human starships. Not refits of alien vessels this time, but original designs, built from the ground up with human engineering and Varani technology combined. The first of these ships, the DSV Persistence, would be launched 18 months later. It was not beautiful. It was not elegant. It looked like exactly what it was, a warship built by a species that had learned how to fight before it learned how to fly. Captain Luke Harmon spent 2 months in a military hospital in San Diego, recovering from his injuries. His left arm had been broken in 3 places. He had burns across his back and a piece of shrapnel lodged near his spine that the doctors decided was safer to leave in than to remove. He would walk with a slight limp for the rest of his life. He did not complain. He had lost 63 crew members in the battle, including Amy Soto. He attended every memorial service, standing straight despite the pain, and he personally wrote a letter to every family. He did not rush. One afternoon, as he sat in a chair by the window of his hospital room, looking out at the Pacific Ocean, there was a knock at the door. He turned and saw Commander Tylek standing in the doorway, stooping slightly to fit through the human-sized frame. The alien had come to Earth for the first time, a gesture that Harmon understood was significant. Tylek entered the room slowly and sat in the chair beside the bed. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The translator device sat on the table between them, humming softly. Finally, Tylek spoke. "When we approached your world, we thought you were small, young, a species still learning to walk among the stars, with nothing to offer but raw materials and perhaps some kindness. We thought we would take what we needed and leave you in peace." He paused, and his large dark eyes turned toward the window, toward the ocean and the sky beyond it. "You are the most stubborn, resourceful, and terrifyingly creative species I have ever encountered in all my years. You did not simply repair our ships. You gave us back our war. You gave us weapons we had never imagined, and strategies we had never considered. And then, when you could have stayed home and wished us well, you climbed into ships you had built with your own hands and fought beside us." He looked at Harmon. "Why? You had no obligation, no treaty, no debt. Why did you do it?" Harmon was quiet for a moment. He thought about Amy Soto and the way she had laughed during the long nights in hyperspace. He thought about the 63 names he had written in those letters. He thought about the blue planet outside his window, spinning slowly through space, full of people who argued and fought and loved and built things, and tore them down and built them again. Then he looked at Tylek and gave a small, tired smile. "You showed up at our door, beat up and asking for help. Where I come from, when someone shows up like that, you don't just hand them a bandage and send them on their way. You invite them in, you fix what's broken, and if someone's chasing them, you grab your coat and walk out the door with them." He shifted in his chair, wincing slightly at the pain in his back. "That's just what we do." Tylek studied him for a long time. The translator hummed between them, converting the words, but Tylek understood something beyond the words, something in the way Harmon said them, a simplicity that was not simple at all, a kindness that had teeth. He reached out one long, thin hand and placed it on Harmon's shoulder. It was the first time a Varani had ever made that gesture to a human. In Varani culture, it meant something that did not translate well into any human language. Something between gratitude, respect, and the recognition of a bond that would not be broken. Harmon reached up and placed his own hand over Tylek's. He did not need a translation. Outside the window, the sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere out in the galaxy, the Drakari were pulling back their fleets for the first time in living memory. Somewhere, Varani soldiers were celebrating a victory they had never thought possible. And somewhere, in shipyards and laboratories and intelligence offices across Earth, humans were already working on what came next. The galaxy had looked at Earth and seen a small, quiet world full of short-lived creatures who had never left their own solar system. It would not make that mistake again.